And you, government employees, if you're a government employee right now in this era, in today, you better start preparing. I ain't gonna lie to you. You need to actually understand, you need to be paying attention to this more than anybody because you might be out of a job. And I'm saying this severely because it's real. I've been on all sides of this thing. I've been a government employee before. I was in the military. Right? If you are a shitty driver, you cannot go and be a great, high-paying employee. You're a hazard. I've had companies where I've employed up to 12 people over the last 6 years. Only they will really know. It's their own little bubble, right? It's their own little world that they live in where, you don't really have to be extremely productive because their salaries and their income is not based on productivity. It's based on how much they can tax the taxpayers or what tariffs can come in. It's all based on government funds. It's not based on competition, free markets, and productivity.
Treasury. There's just a mass opportunity for a mega reorganization and thereby downsizing of this bureaucracy. And it's a one-way ratchet because it's not like if another president comes back, they can write that back into existence by fiat. They'd actually have to go through Congress to do it. And so I think this is to call it once in a generation understates it. It might be closer to once in a century or once in a nation's lifetime opportunity to drastically reorganize and reshape and drive structural change in the federal government. And I'm pretty pumped up about that, actually.
Would you be involved?
And that's what Black nationalism is about, right? You guys that all talk all this Black power, Black unity, all this other stuff, y'all don't know what that means. Y'all don't even know what that means. Y'all are just talking stupid. They get mad when white people say white power, white national, and white unity. They supposed to. That's how they supposed to feel. And that's what we talking about. Got to have integrity on these conversations. So I started looking at the crime statistics. I started looking around me in prison. And I started listening to people in prison. And when I try to talk this way with these guys in prison, it's like, what are we talking about, dude? I don't give a fuck that donk down there had 20 foes and he was fucking all the hoes. I don't want to hear that shit, bro. Do you see where the fuck we at? All right. Socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, meaning the ultimate means, the ultimate outcome of producing something, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. All right. Similar policy or practice based on political and economic theory of socialism. All right. In Marxist theory, a transitional societal state between the overthrow of capitalism and the realization of communism. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome everybody to the show, Loose and Reckless. I am your host, Ray. On your way in, smash that like button like you've been here before. I appreciate you guys coming in and tuning in to what we got to talk about today. As you see in the title, it's called Socialism Vs Capitalism. This is a personable topic to me, very personable, and I have a very acute perspective on the topic, not just due to what you can learn through academia, what you can learn through researching, all of these different things. I have a personal experience on multiple levels with it, and I'm going to lay out my biases. I like to lay out my biases before I speak on polarizing polarizing topics, right? So socialism and communism is obviously a polarizing topic. From my perspective, I'm going to share something with you that most content creators wouldn't, and this is why I'm unique. My route to becoming a capitalist and actually knowing exactly what a capitalist is and starting to live my life according to those principles, because there's power in definitions, there's power in words and understanding exactly what they mean, right? So, you might be a capitalist and don't know you're a capitalist, and therefore you don't practice the way of being a capitalist to its utmost because you don't even really think of it that way. But when you have a descriptor and then you start having game plans and structures that set up the principles on whether this was a capitalistic move or capitalistic decision or a communistic decision, which kind of falls under the umbrella of socialistic perspectives, it kind of raises issue, or it brings hype to the whole situation. All right, so this is going to be a long video. As you see, this says part 1, but it's so much that I can go on about, use examples about, bring out. So this is going to be actually a series. This is just part 1, socialism versus capitalism. I'm gonna try not to bore you guys. I'm gonna start off by, like I said, making my case as far as where I come from. I had to learn capitalism, socialism in a rough spot. I was in prison. I was locked up in solitary confinement because me, I was always bucking the rules and bucking the jack. I'm carrying money in prison, all types of stuff. So I had some time in solitary confinement, 9 months to be exact. And all I could do was read. All I could do was explore my thoughts. But one of the biggest things that caught me off, that I did was self-reflection and accountability. I had to own up to why I was there, because I wasn't just the average person, you know what I mean, that finds their way in prison. They, and I'm not trying to sound extremely cocky or anything like that, but I had already up to that point lived a wild life. Let me put some visuals back there to show you. All right. So as you see, that's me in a uniform right here, right? This is me in 2007, right? I had deployed a few times. I've been to different countries. I traveled the world, right? I lived a reality that a lot of people wouldn't understand. I got out of prison and I was sitting in prison and I'm just sitting here analyzing how I got out of the military, served honorably, and I lost my damn mind. All right, I had to take accountability of all that. I went back to doing things I was doing before I went to prison, dabbling in drugs, trafficking drugs. I was in prison for trafficking cocaine, among other things, right? Uh, so needless to say, fast forward from 2007, I get out of prison, reflected on things, and took total accountability. That's number one thing in capitalism, is you're accountable to what you are bringing to the market. And the market could be the marketplace of ideas. It could be the marketplace of labor. It could be the marketplace, because labor is a marketplace. One thing every individual has as a resource is time, right? Your number one resource in this world is time. There's nothing more valuable than your time. You have cash. That's only an agreement to exchange amongst parties. What reduces to the greatest common denominator is time. All right. I don't care if it's a product. I don't care if it's whatever it is, a house. It could be a hard asset. It could be anything. It's time. So sitting in prison, affected my time greatly. And I analyzed that. I studied a lot of things business wise. I had a bunch of, business minded articles, information. That's all I did my time with business, right? Now, becoming a businessman, or becoming a ideological businessman, right? Because it was just all ideas at that moment to a degree. It made me face a lot of different things with the Black community. So my perspective from a Black man in prison with my mind state also after traveling the world, being in the military for 7 years, right? And then going back to the hood and doing some of the same dumb shit I was doing before I went to the military, right? Landing in prison, doing solitary confinement, have to analyze why this is so common coming from where I come from, that we find a way in prison. And there's a lot of things that we are thinking wrong. Is a victimhood thing that exists with us too. So me finding myself in solitary confinement and having nobody but to blame for these actions but myself led me to wanting to figure out how to do things the right way. What's the game that's being played? You know what I'm saying? If you play chess, there's a game that's always being played. There's rules to the game, and you can't play the game unless you know the rules, you know the outline, right? What are the rules to the game? So while we're playing chess, I move a pawn this way, you know that I could do it that way, but if I move a pawn sideways, you'll be able to call it out. Well, so does societies and cultures and governance. All of that kind of works the same way. And one of the things that has made the Western world as a whole is so prosperous, where they can make entitled people, right? People that are entitled to things, right? To make entitled people is the fact that we have embraced the idea of capitalism and using capitalism as a governance of itself. Because one thing in a capitalist society is, if I can't bring you value, I can't successfully keep you as a customer or a patron. I can't keep you as a person that wants to keep helping my service or my product. And also that goes hand in hand in relationships. If I'm not giving my wife what she needs as my companion, then she won't exchange what I need for her to be my companion. The world is a fair exchange. The problem is those fair exchanges don't always have equal outcomes. Okay, like you can't measure equal outcomes with just exchanges, right? So capitalism is not about being fair. All right, it's about merit. It's about what you are accountable for, what you can do, what you could take in your reins and do. Now, how does that correlate to politics? It is in direct unison together. All right. Governance has to have an economic stance. So policies have to have an economic slant. You have to know the rules to the game, right? So the economic slant from the political side affects how the economic side moves. I'm gonna play some stuff for you guys. Let me share the screen again. I'm kind of going on a rant, and I didn't want to do that, but I can get long-winded. But we got multiple parts. I hope you guys stick around for it all. I built a business when I got out of prison. All right. So I've seen the bottom, I've seen highs, I've seen lows. I've built a few businesses, and I can tell you one thing: failure is nothing but stacked ways to climb higher. So I've had successes, I've had some failures, I've employed people. Um, it's been a wonderful ride, a wonderful journey. I've had trucks, I've had a trucking company. I've taught people how to do these things, right? I've moved millions of dollars of equipment, right? Um, I've experienced all sides of this thing. I got kids. I'm teaching them the way things go. You know what I mean? I'm teaching them how to learn my craft and be able to replicate it, right? I've taught other individuals, grown men, how to do this stuff, and how to now use this thing as something that they will be doing for the rest of their life. You know what I mean? Um, all of this is baked into how do you move forward in your life? How do you enrich those that you love? How do you enrich yourself and stay moralistic about it? How do you add value to other people in this lifetime? That's what capitalism, in essence, is truly about. All right. Oh, that's a video we're going to cover. I got to get into it with you. Um, great, great video. Analyze this and give it to you on another level. Anton Daniels is a very sharp guy. Right? He covered some of this socialism topic without even trying to, right? His perspective is kind of how I perceive things as far as the victimhood mentality we have in this country as Black people. I mean, we have it bad, all right? Um, and there's things that has kind of led to that, and you know, we've had it ingrained in on us on it. All right, so this is a clip from Anton Daniels. This is his The Millionaire Morning Show. I'll put a link in the description so you can reach out and lock in with him. Great brother to follow. I love his content. He's dropping nothing but gas regularly every day. He's keeping you up in touch with the news, the current news. I really recommend following this brother. He's going to give you perspectives of things that I can't and I don't have the time for. And he knows exactly what I mean when I say I don't have the time for it. So he knows it's not a shot. This brother here is sharp. He's on his job, going to his full catalog. He's been there for a round. And there's other people I'm gonna bring out that are like this too, that I want to endorse with my face, even though they're bigger than me or whatever. I'm gonna spread the word, because when you run across good stuff, you got to do it. And that's what Black nationalism is about. Right? You guys that all talk all this Black power, Black unity, all this other stuff, y'all don't know what that means. Y'all don't even know what that means. Y'all are just talking stupid. They get mad when white people say white power, white national, and white unity. They supposed to. That's how they supposed to feel. And that's how you should be feeling about Black nationalism. But guess what's in there? Nationalism. If your identity is not wrapped partly into you being an American and understanding what that means, then you are a part of the problem. Because if you think that you're an African, for real, go to Africa and play that game. They're going to economically destroy you while you're there. They're going to suck the life out you. Why? Because you're not an African. Okay? But that's a topic for a whole nother level, a whole nother day, and maybe another channel. But we'll get to that. We'll get to it. But I'm going to go ahead and play some of this. We're going to go ahead and rock out to this. Check this out.
Nicholas Henry says economy only benefit the top percent. The economy will only benefit the top 5%.
You know, and I feel his frustration on this. You know why? The number one reason why I feel his frustration on this is I talk to so many brothers that just their concern and their perspective is just off. It's just off, man. And when you try to correct them, they get an attitude about it. But it's like, okay, so why waste time? But at the same time, you want to keep trying. You want to keep trying. Let me let him rock.
Nicholas Henry, I like your bow tie, so I'm going to tell you this. There is literally 1,700 new millionaires every single day. Once a day, when the clock strikes 12, there are 1,700 new millionaires minted every single day. Look it up. It is a fact.
So, real quick, on that topic, these are actual factual numbers, but it take a little time to understand maybe the markets, a little bit of what, instead of paying for your $400 car note, that $400 was going into a S&P 500 mutual fund with dividends that give you back quarterly earnings every 3 months. Knowing that is a huge difference. The average person that puts $400 a month into the S&P over the course of 20 years, guaranteed they're a millionaire. And that's just, it's proven fact. So the idea of these numbers are things that have to be broken down and to understanding what the free markets actually are and what accountability actually is, right? When you jump into this topic, you know, I look back at when I was locked up. One of the things I used to do, which was almost gospel to me, was just study the almanac, all the stats from the Bureau of Labor, from criminal stats, everything, demographic stats. I loved looking at stats, but what it did, it shattered my bubble of thought, right? I looked at things about, you know, about the economic issues in this country. Why did it seem like so many Black people were so poor? I mean, we made up in 2012, if I can recall correctly, 2012, we were like 13% or 12% of the population, or 13% of the population, and we made up around 50% of the poverty earnings, right? But the most wealthy demographic that was growing at that time, and what was at the top at the time, was Asians. You know, me personally, I had one of those old victimhood mind states where I was like, man, the white man holding the Black people down back in 2011, even though we had a Black president at the time. I'm not going to lie to you. That's where I was at, but I was coming out of it then. And that's a whole nother story. You know, how I switched from being that way or looking, following. Barack Obama led me to this path because I have integrity. All right. So we'll get into that too. But, you know, looking at the statistics, Asians led economically. Asians led financially. They had the most per capita, most self-owned businesses. I had to look at these things like, if this country was so racist, how they let these Asians come over here, you know what I'm saying, and prosper the way they did. And then I look at Black folk and I'm like, hold on, what's going on here? We've been free. You know, they didn't like Asians back then when they ain't like us. What are we talking about? You know, gotta have integrity on these conversations. So I started looking at the crime statistics. I started looking around me in prison. And I started listening to people in prison. And when I try to talk this way with these guys in prison, it's like, what are we talking about, dude? I don't give a fuck that donk down there had 20 foes and he was fucking all the hoes. I don't want to hear that shit, bro. Do you see where the fuck we at? If we ain't talking about no money, what the fuck we talking about? Right? That's the mind state I was coming at. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? You know, anyway, let me let him cook. I'm getting off topic.
Look it up. It is a fact. You have to get out of the victim Olympics and thinking that somebody is going to do something for you. It is up to you. Most millionaires are first generation millionaires. It is not wealth that is passed down to them. You have to get out of the matrix, sir. You have to wake up and realize that it is an opportunity outside for you that you have, and you are blessed to be in this country. I know people like to talk stuff about America, but I'm just telling you, you are blessed to be in this country. That means that if,
let me tell you something. The average person that's poor in this country is wealthy in 90% of the other countries in the world. Think about that. Think about that stat. The average person that's poor in this country is wealthier than 90% of the wealthy in other countries. It sounds crazy to y'all, but you gotta invest your mind. I'll bring some videos on that we'll review and show some insights to other places, right? So you can get a little taste of some of these things. But there's places where there is no such thing as welfare at all. You got 12 kids. You just got 12 kids. Y'all gotta feed them. Y'all better get the milk in them goats and whatever y'all doing. But it is what it is. There ain't no social system. Ain't no social network And I'm not totally opposed to none of that. There should be routes to getting invested in people to getting back into the markets. I do believe that. Right? Like, that's another topic. Let me let them rock.
You reduce the self-inflicted wounds. No more car notes that you can't afford. No more over insurance. No more buying things to impress people that don't even care about you. No more credit card debt. No more Klarna. No more Afterpay. No more over shopping. No more simping for these women and spending money on people that don't even care nothing about you. No more of anything that does not benefit you. You put your head down. You go back and you reduce your expenses. You make the sacrifice. You then are intentional with your investments. And then you limit the people around you that's going to have you crashing out. You too can be a millionaire. And then the question that we will be having, or the conversation that we will be having, is not how dusty somebody is, but how can you reduce the amount of money that you have to give over to the federal government in taxes? That is the conversation that I have with my friends. Hey, man, what did you do? What's your tax strategy? How are you moving? What kind of business you starting? How did you get your write-offs? What is going? The conversation need to change. But
that's so important what he just pointed out. I mean, when I go to lunch with some of my partners, man, we ain't sitting around talking about what's going on in the hood. We talking about investment strategies. We talking about real estate. We talking about and if you're not in a circle that's moving like that or has the capacity mentally to move like that, man, it's time to cut that off, man. It's time to cut that off. That don't even make sense. That is literally retarded. There is no way to prosper. Some of the stuff he was talking about, and I'm gonna link it in the scripture. You ain't got to watch it all here right now. It's a nice, wonderful channel to get into. But the personal finance part is one of the number one things that I wanted to point out on this. So, yeah, let me stop sharing this. So, personal responsibility on not having extreme liabilities. That's important. When I got out of prison, I didn't have anything. I lost everything. I might have been trapping hard and making money. Man, all that was gone, man. Right before I got sentenced, that was gone. I was in county so long. I want you guys got to understand this, man. This is real life, real life experience. I was homeless when I got out of prison. I had to go live in my mother's garage. I had a mattress in my mama's garage in Florida at 30 years old, right? But at 30 years old, from 30 till now, till 40, I got a paid off house. Think about that. How many of y'all out here got college degrees and you spent the better half of your 20s, getting that degree? You get the job, you get a career, y'all are just not financing your homes at 30, 35. And you got 30 years that you're looking or thinking it's going to take you to pay it off. Right? It's perception. It's perspective. Right? So I do have a bias in this conversation of socialism versus capitalism. I see capitalism as the only thing that has ever been proven to bring third world countries into first world countries. Only thing that has been proven to bring third world countries into first world countries is capitalism. Most of those third world countries are socialists or communists. And even if they call themselves a republic, right? Like the Republic of Congo, they operate in a communistic manifesto. The Republic of China, Chinese Communist Party is the people running the republic. So if the Chinese Communist Party never has opposition, never gets any fair elections, right? They control their people, absolute power. And they are self-admitted communists. They're communists in a republic. Think about that. Where here we got the Socialist Democrats of America. Wink, wink. Socialism and communism is they two peas in the same pot, right? Now, don't get me. Don't think that I'm over here caping for the Republicans, because there are a lot of crooks that need to be voted out. I've seen them. I've watched them. I'm so sick of seeing Mitch McConnell in hearings. Been there since the 60s. You understand what I'm saying? It's not about the parties. It's about the principles, right? So there's checks and balances in our country that a lot of countries don't have because they're communists. We'll get into that too. So anyway, in a capitalist system, your time is the ultimate resource. It's all about exchanging value for value. In our system, you can voluntarily go work for somebody. The wages are based off of competition and supply and demand. What you can go and demand on the market is based off of merit. Right? If you are a shitty driver, you cannot go and be a great high-paying employee. You're a hazard. I've had companies where I've employed up to 12 people over the last 6 years. Right? I've literally been directly signing people's checks. Times when I didn't even have the money to pay myself, I would pay people. Right? I would pay people. I would make sure that they were paid, and I didn't have nothing to take home myself because I had to keep the business running. All right? And they don't know it. They making good money, right? Weekly. So the perspective that I come from is very biased, and I believe that capitalism is the way to go. And I have to lay that out before we get extremely deep in it, right? There's a video that I need to show you guys that is a part of this. And before I do that, I want to just highlight something about the whole Kamala Harris communist idea. And there is a synergy in this, right? Let me pull it up. The people that budgeted her money failed her. She made $1 billion. She raised $1 billion within the first month, 2-3 months, right? And she's got a deficit after the election of $21 million. How irresponsible is that?
Meanwhile, the Harris campaign is over, but there are still some bills left to be paid. The campaign of Harris Walsh raised over $1 billion, but somehow, despite, I believe, having $160 million still in the bank on October 20th, ends the campaign $20 million in debt. Now, how did they spend that money? There's a lot of different ways you go about spending $1 billion. But the one that stuck out to me, guys, is, of course, she did the interview with the Call Her Daddy podcast. This was a podcast that stopped and started several times in terms of scheduled, then delayed, then scheduled, then delayed. Ultimately, it ended up happening, I think, in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure where they ended up doing it.
At a hotel in Washington, D.C.
So they had to recreate the Call Her Daddy podcast, which the campaign paid for. Recreate the set, $100,000 for that set right there.
They recreated the set.
Because she didn't want, because Kamala didn't want to go to LA. I guess it's filmed out of LA or shot out of LA. So she didn't want to go there. And she said, we want to do it here. But we wanted, again, in line with the inauthenticity of the campaign. She said, let's make it look like I went all the way to LA. It'll cost $100,000. Thank you, donors.
The guest would pay for that. When I saw this, I'm like, well, the show pays for their own recreation of their own set, right? Like, we would do that. I mean, if I went somewhere, for example, to interview The Rock, when I did that, who do you think paid for the cameras in this?
So essentially, using other people's money to just blow it. She could have got on a plane and flew over there. But that was an unwise financial decision. All right. You understand where I'm getting at? There is no rhyme or reason to a lot of these socialist minded individuals' spending habits, which is, one thing that happens whenever you give somebody something and they didn't earn it, right? When somebody is given something, they don't typically love it or respect it the way they would if they earned it. All right. So you giving them $1 billion and they don't have the concept of ever being in the private market. They've always taken taxpayer dollars to pay their salaries. That's all they've ever been in. They don't understand productivity. Me as a business owner, when I make purchases down to the dollar, it matters. And when I spend money on labor down to the dollar, it matters. It affects the cost of my services. It affects everything, and the way that the socialists run their finances is always at a deficit. It's always because of debt, credit, and we can access more credit. We can access more debt. The more you keep moving that way, you dig everything into deeper ditches. But you could only access that reality once you've built it off of capitalism. All right, we'll get more into that. Let me take you on another route.
So what it is now a little over 24 hours after Donald Trump won the majority of the popular vote, about half the Latino vote, overwhelming majority of the electoral college, just all three branches of government.
Amazing. Yeah.
Both houses of outspoken conservative and outspoken Trump voter.
Which is your right to do in this country.
Of course, he was a COVID dissident, and he was raided by the FBI today.
I think that we got to go big. We got to go fast. Two major issues right out the gate. One is already the one that we have a great judicial branch right now at the top of the Supreme Court, the best we've had, certainly in our lifetime. But you combine that with the strong electoral mandate for the presidency, a strong, decisive majority in the Senate, hopefully get a good Senate majority leader picked, and as much as possible, as quickly as possible. I think that the lesson from last time around is if you don't move fast, the beast ultimately will,
So we're going to talk about this clip from Tucker Carlson and Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm not playing the whole thing. I will link the whole thing in the description, and you guys can go down there and go watch the full thing. I encourage you do so. Please do so. All right. This is basically going to highlight some of my concerns with bureaucracy in a socialist system. Now, what you have to understand is the more government grows, that's more socialist, right? The less government is and how much government is reduced, that is more capitalist, right? Free market. You want to unchain the market. Like for me, for instance, when I was employing 12 individuals, I had to have less regulation during COVID and all these regulations that was going on and all these liberal cities was shutting down. The freight market started going crazy, and it was going crazy in a bad way. More the regulations, the restrictions, and just through a lot of democratic policies, it hurts a lot of individuals that are trying to get ahead. I remember when Biden came in and immediately signed off numerous executive orders that we can argue the purpose of, but they directly affected me and my business. I immediately had issues with catching payroll, right? Immediately, it got crazy. Now I'm a company that's generating $1 million a year, and now I'm struggling to make sure that everybody's getting their salaries because of regulations. You understand how ridiculous that is? That is socialist overreach, right? And we can get into a lot of different morals and moralities about things like the EPA, the health administration. We can get into all of that stuff in a later topic if you guys are interested. But those are socialist intruders into the markets. So I'm gonna play this clip. I'm gonna play it uninterrupted for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes because this is a very fascinating segment from Tucker Carlson and Vivek, and it also expresses kind of what going forward, what's going to happen. And you, government employees, if you're a government employee right now in this era, in today, you better start preparing. I ain't gonna lie to you. You need to actually understand. You need to be paying attention to this more than anybody, because you might be out of a job. And I'm saying this severely because it's real. I've been on all sides of this thing. I've been a government employee before. I was in the military. All right, so I get it, but I can tell you this: if you are DoD related, there's a good chance that you won't be affected. But if you're in all of these other agencies, all of these other bureaucratic installed monarchies, little monarchies that's just writing laws off to give orders to people's lives that weren't elected or voted in, they were appointed. Oh yeah, if you fall in that category, you need to be paying attention to this. All right, you need to be paying attention to this. All right, let's go.
Don't think Alfie Oakes was doing anything that warranted an FBI raid, and I doubt he would have been raided had he not been an outspoken Trump voter. So anyway, these people are scary. They're going to be thrown out of power. What does Trump do with the mandate that he has?
I hope as much as possible, as quickly as possible. I think that the lesson from last time around is if you don't move fast, the beast ultimately will swallow any individual whole.
Of course.
And so I think he's ready to go in with real determination this time around to move quickly, move fast. I think we need wins behind our back early on. One of the things that I think we learned from last time around is a lot of this is just early momentum, right? Let's say we have all three branches. Let's say we've got judicial branch. We have a great judicial branch right now at the top of the Supreme Court, the best we've had, certainly in our lifetime. But you combine that with the strong electoral mandate for the presidency, a strong, decisive majority in the Senate, hopefully get a good Senate majority leader picked. And then, I think Rick Scott would be great for that, but it
can't be John Cornyn.
Yeah,
John Cornyn is an aggressive liberal. And if Donald Trump wins the popular vote and John Cornyn of Texas, who is way more liberal than a lot of Democrats I know, winds up Senate majority leader, it's crazy.
So assume a few more of those correct pieces fall into place, and then even a majority, at least an impeachment-proof House. I think that we got to go big. We got to go fast. Two major issues right out the gate. One is already the one that Donald Trump's been talking about the entire time. He's pumped up about it, and he is not going to mess around with this, is to fix the illegal immigration crisis and actually seal our national borders. And he is laser focused on that. He has made no secrets about that. That's his top campaign message. He's going to keep that promise, and I think he's going to keep it fast starting on day one. That's number one. And there's a lot to say on that, but it's hard to say what hasn't already been said about what needs to be done.
Right.
It's just about getting in there and doing it. So that's mass deportation. Number one is millions of illegals out of this country and sealing the border along with it. But I'm actually far more intrigued and interested for the long run in what I think of as the second mass deportation that we require, which is the mass deportation of millions of unelected federal bureaucrats out of the DC bureaucracy. And I do think that is what's going to save this country.
But you
in the long
can't do
run.
that.
I think you actually can.
You can't fire. We can all be fired. I've been fired many times. I'm sure you just lost a presidential race. Like the only group that cannot fail that has actual tenure is not Harvard professors.
Not even. Yep.
It's not even.
Yeah.
It's federal bureaucrats. Amy Wax just got, tenure is no protection at all compared to the protection of federal employment.
Yeah. So the one difference is, first of all, we have a president who I think has the spine to actually step up and do it. But the second thing is we actually have and not to get too, in the weeds here, but we actually have a legal landscape with the current Supreme Court that allows us to do what couldn't have been done in the last half century.
But they have a moral right to work from home 10 hours a week at our expense at a far higher wage than the average American.
Oh, absolutely. So,
all right, so check this out. What they just touched on is a fascinating point. All right. Tucker's, of course, being tongue-in-cheek. Now, I know a lot of individuals that currently still work for the military, or they have transferred out of being in the military and now they work for government agencies. Okay. I know plenty of them. Okay. This is not a shot at them, but it is a reality that only they will really know. It's their own little bubble, right? It's their own little world that they live in where, you don't really have to be extremely productive because their salaries and their income is not based on productivity. It's based on how much they can tax the taxpayers or what tariffs can come in. It's all based on government funds. It's not based on competition, free markets, and productivity. Any private sector company that starts from the bottom has to work off of productivity. You don't have an unlimited budget. You don't have an unlimited button to press and print money and then hold people at gunpoint to collect taxes from their income to staff more people. All right, so it's a machine that ends up growing itself more and more year after year to justify itself existing. And in any country that has gotten as prosperous as ours and as big as ours, the number one thing is to keep stimulating that part of the growth, not stymie it by putting this overweight blob that holds it down and sucks the life out of it, which is bureaucracy, government, because they're going to always justify a reason for them to exist. Okay, so you have to look at the bigger picture. Why did Biden, I think it was 2023, come out with the budget to increase IRS agents by 85,000? So 85,000 people got jobs, and then they put into legislator that they all need to be able to carry and fire a gun with deadly precision if need be. Why would an IRS agent need a gun to go and why would they need an order to go kill you at all? They're not criminal investigators. In what world, if somebody, is late on their taxes, do you need to show up and kick in their door with guns? What reality does that make sense? But they slid that all into reality without even having any mainstream coverage, because it wasn't interest to the state. You had to search this type of information out. And that's the type of stuff that starts happening with socialist economies, socialist governance. You start letting the important things slip under the radar. But the bullshit you want to talk about is all on the news all the time. All right. So you got issues like that with this bureaucracy and socialism push and cultural Marxism push, which we'll get there. It's just a lot. So let's just cover this point.
Yeah. The funny thing is,
but they have a moral right. You can't complain about.
You actually brought up a really interesting dimension of this. If you literally just mandated that they have to actually show up to work Monday through Friday, I know, radical idea.
They don't go to work.
Actually, a good number of them would quit that way. Right. That step alone. So you don't even have to talk about, you want a mass firing, a mass exodus. Just tell them they have to come back 5 days a week from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. Like many Americans, most Americans who work hard to earn a living in this country, just show up physically to work. You'd actually have about a 25% thinning out of the federal bureaucracy right there. So that's an easy first step. Next step is, so the Supreme Court, what they've laid out right now is they've basically said in so many words that most federal regulations are unconstitutional. Close to in so many words, that's what they've said. If Congress didn't pass it, right? So basic principle here is the people we elect to run the government should run the government. That's not the case today. The people who write most of the rules were never elected to their positions.
And the Congress makes the laws. That's what the Constitution says.
That's what the Constitution says, but that's not exactly how it works today. And the Supreme Court, thankfully, has had a major problem with that. So there's this case, West Virginia versus EPA 2 years ago. There was this Loper-Bright case that came down this year that overturned this horrific doctrine called Chevron deference, which said that the courts have to defer to the agency's judgments on what the law actually says. The Supreme Court's torn all of that to shreds. And basically what they've said is, if it's a major question, if it's something that affects people's lives economically or relates to a major political issue, it cannot be written into existence by somebody who is not elected to office or who can't be voted out of office. It has to be done by the people who are elected to write the laws. So who could be voted out if they write bad laws? That's a beautiful thing. And I think that those were seismic
That's
in
democracy.
their impact.
You're describing democracy.
That's actually the essence of democracy. That's the essence of self-governance. So we've had those cases come down under this Biden-Harris tenure. But actually, if you have somebody who takes over in the presidency now, as we're going to on January 20th, who takes a posture of executive humility, and this is the key part, right? Because people will say, oh, Donald Trump's going to go, if he's going to go shut down these agencies, that's executive fiat. No, you got it mixed up. The executive fiat's what's been happening for the last century, really, in this country, but over the last 4 years included. Unelected bureaucrats by fiat legislating what otherwise should have gone through we the people and our elected representatives. So the Supreme Court's already said, told the executive branch, no, you can't do that. Actually, a lot of that was illegal and unconstitutional. All we need right now is an executive branch that says, hey, the Supreme Court, you've told us a lot of what we're doing is illegal. It violates the Constitution. So we're not going to do that anymore. And that requires us to take any regulation, any federal regulation that fails these standards that the Supreme Court has given us in West Virginia versus EPA, in Loper Bright, and there's another case called Jarkissi versus SEC. That one relates to slightly different issues. But the Supreme Court standards, all of these regulations that fail that test, we're just going to rescind them. They're null and void. And we don't have to rescind them because we already know they're actually null and void and illegitimate anyway. But we will put the public on notice to say these tens of thousands of regulations that have been written by federal bureaucrats, they're null and void because they were never written by the people who we elected. Now, if you have 50% fewer regulations, that creates kind of an industrial logic to say that, okay, well, then we don't need 50% of the people around anymore either. And the way these rules have worked in the past is they have this, you know this well, right? The civil service rules, the civil protection rules that say you can't fire these federal bureaucrats. That's been the historical, accepted dogma. Actually, if you read the law carefully, it doesn't work quite that way. That applies to individual firings, right? To say if I fire you, you have a special protection to say that I either politically discriminated against you or discriminated for some other reason, or if you fire a bunch of people with discretionary firings, if there's a disparate racial impact or a gender impact or whatever, you could be sued on a million grounds. But if it is part of a mass firing, what you call a reduction in force, if it's just like a mass firing, those actually fall outside the civil service rules as they exist. So if you go in that order to say that, okay, the Supreme Court's already told us that all of these regulations, not all of them, but an overwhelming majority of them are invalid. You go straight down that list and say we have 50%, 70%, 80% fewer regulations. Then you look at the 4 million people, civil servants or whatever, and say that, okay, if we have 80% fewer regulations, then we need 80% fewer people to enforce them. That simply makes sense. Then you have the industrial logic for right there under current law, mass downsizing just the scale of the federal government. And part of the problem is these things are deeply related. When you have a bunch of people who show up to work who should have never had that job in the first place,
right,
they start finding things to do, actually. And that's what gave us that regulatory morass in the first place, like the Federal Reserve. I mean, if you just fired, about 22,000 employees in the Federal Reserve, if you fired 90% of them, there would still be 2,000 left, which is arguably on the high side if you have a Federal Reserve whose sole focus is restoring the stability of the US dollar, which I do think should be the sole mandate and sole purpose of the US Fed. Same thing with respect to, you go straight down the list.
Well,
EPA,
what else
SEC,
what do
FTC.
22,000 employees do at the Fed?
Oh, they do a lot of calculations. They do a lot of conjecture, and it feeds their hubris a little bit. So markets, and I worked at a hedge fund. That was the first job I had for 7 years out of college, and, understand the way in which people will huddle around divining what the exact meaning is of a comma at the end of Federal Reserve minutes. Does that mean that they think the economy's overheating so much that they have to raise interest rates? That feeds the kind of hubris of the bureaucrat to make them think that there's some kind of genius and some kind of actual savant that merits this attention. But the reason the market actors pay attention to what these Federal Reserve people say is not because they have some sort of expert knowledge that's actually meaningful. They're actually looking to see effectively how they're going to screw it up in the process, right? And so academics took over the Federal Reserve in the late 1990s.
But the Fed only has one big lever, right?
Well, they have a few levers actually they're able to pull. Yeah. I mean, just one big lever broadly means how much money you feed in or suck out of the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true, but they've used that in ways that have been, I think, badly destructive to the country. I mean, because here's like an example of how. So when the academics took over the Fed in the late 1990s, like one of the things that happened, and this was a kind of managerial class in this agency, and that's a 3-letter agency in some form, the FED, right? What they said was, okay, if wages are going up, this is a long story if you want to get into this, but we can give you a short version. If wages are going up, that is a leading indicator of inflation. So wage growth was a bad thing. So the way you fight wage growth is by tightening monetary policy into wages going up. Here's the problem with that. And anybody who's run a business knows this, okay? Wages are generally the last thing to go up in the business cycle. If things are going really well in the business cycle, the last thing most employers want to say, I'm not saying it's the right decision or the wrong decision, but most employers, the last thing they want to have go up is the wages. So wages tend to be actually not a leading indicator of the business cycle. Wage growth tends to be a trailing indicator of the business cycle. But you have the academic mindset of the Federal Reserve that said, that's one thing we can measure, that we can observe and feel smart about. So wage growth, we're going to treat that as a leading indicator of inflation, even when it's a trailing indicator. Well, what does that mean? They tighten monetary policy precisely into a natural downturn of the business cycle, which gives you the boom bust. And then what comes after a bust is of course the bailout. So you get these boom bust bailout cycles. That's exactly what happened. You could say in 2000, you could see it in 2008. You could see some version of it, even in 2023, although that was a little bit more subtle. And so anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole about the Fed, but it's an example of when you have 23,000 people show up to work who should have never had the job in the first place. They start finding things to do. And when you find things to do, that ends up being destructive rather than helpful, which means the root cause is you got to get rid of the presence of the people who populate that bureaucracy. But in order to do that, you need this industrial logic. And that industrial logic, in my opinion, is what the Supreme Court has already given us, which is this mandate to say the executive branch, the fake executive branch, the administrative state, has written all these rules by fiat. Most of them are illegal. Like they're actually unlawful. They're illegitimate. And so if you have an executive branch that says, okay, we're going to recognize that most of these regulations are illegitimate, there's your blueprint for then shaving down the size of the federal bureaucracy, which is then the permanent solution to stop that bureaucracy from perpetuating this kind of illegal rampant action. And I think that's the stuff of how you actually save a country. Boring as that might sound.
It's not boring. And I think I've never heard in all the, my whole life in Washington, anybody suggest that this is a process that could really be stalled or reversed. The process being the growth of the federal government, which is just inexorable because the purpose of the institution is to protect itself and expand. That's
it's like a law of physics applied to this government.
Every institution exists to protect itself for its own benefit. That's its purpose. And it's demonstrable in its behavior. So, but it's so obvious, it's so overwhelming. It's the largest institution in human history. I've never heard anybody say, we have a shot of like lopping off 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, like
80%. Yeah.
That would change everything from our foreign policy to our economy to our culture. You really think that could happen?
Yeah, I think it could happen. I think there'll be trade-offs. I'm not going to paint some sort of exclusively.
Well,
fake
one of the trade-offs
could be
you're going to have a crash in the economy of Arlington, Virginia, which is well deserved,
and maybe a boom of the economy elsewhere,
and long overdue.
Yeah,
why shouldn't Arlington and McLean and Loudoun County share the pain of Gary, Indiana? I don't understand.
The argument being made right there is, why should those people in the bureaucratic agencies, the alphabet agencies, why should these individuals exist solely to regulate and prosper and live prosperous lives off the backs of individuals making fractions of what they make? Not because they're producing anything, but because they're sucking the life out of people. All right. What socialism basically does is, say you work hard all day, right? You're living in a place where you farm. Everybody's farmers, or you're not, and there's poor individuals. Now imagine these poor individuals. You and a couple of your friends, you guys like to look out for them because you have, and you're being able to produce and provide for your family the way you want to, but those individuals over there, they decide, and you watch them daily, decide not to work, decide not to do anything. There's nothing wrong with them physically. They just want to chill out. I believe that is their right to want to chill out. They should be allowed to do so. But then if I help them, I should be allowed to help them. But on the flip side of that, I should also be allowed to not help them. In socialist societies, it doesn't matter whether I want to or not. It's like, would you have a problem with them robbing me because they were robbing me to help them? I think there's something unjust about it, It's one of those things where if you're walking down the street and somebody come at you at gunpoint and rob the hell out you, but then they take all the proceeds that they robbed from you and hand it to a homeless guy down the street, would you still appreciate the fact that they were helping the homeless guy, or would you be furious that this guy just robbed you? This guy just stuck you up at gunpoint and took your money and went and gave it to a guy sitting on the corner constantly smoking a crack pipe. I would be infuriated. Continue right here.
Springfield, Ohio. I
Well,
don't understand that.
actually going to take the bright side of this.
Sorry,
as
I'm taking the apocalyptic side.
I mean, I'm in the golden age mood right now. Right? We're entering the golden age, but
you can feel the resentment.
It's two sides of the same coin, though. They go right together.
Yeah.
Send these people to Gary, Indiana, or to Springfield.
Yeah.
We don't need external individuals to the nation to actually fill those open positions. We have 3 million of them sitting in the greater Washington, D.C. area who, they could say, well, are those people really going to do those jobs? Maybe they should. Actually, they could be far more productive than the destruction that they're doing to the country right now. It is a fact that we have more open jobs than we have people in the country. That's often one of the backdoor arguments made for mass illegal immigration to this country. But actually, okay, I think for rule of law reasons, you need deportation of people who are in this country illegally. But if you get 3 million people out of the federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., they are Americans. And those are available candidates to actually provide a little shot in the arm to the labor market.
Why shouldn't the agencies be moved to Baltimore and Gary?
To the extent they exist, I think they should absolutely be moved. Absolutely. I think many of those agencies should not exist. Many of them that do continue to exist absolutely should be moved to other parts of the country.
So
I don't think the Surgeon General office should sit in Washington, D.C. I don't think you should have much of HHS more broadly. I don't think that the Department of Agriculture should sit in Washington, D.C. I think there are countless agencies, the Department of Education. I think you're wrongfully insulated in Washington, D.C. Now, certain of those agencies, like the Department of Education, should not actually exist. So I wouldn't want to start this process of just saying, okay, let's move them out of Washington, D.C. as some sort of polite, genteel way of avoiding and sidestepping the thing that we actually need to do, which is bring a jackhammer and a chainsaw to the whole thing. But even those that do continue to exist, you would actually have a lot more accountability to the people and probably even some kind of stimulus, if you will, in parts of the country that wouldn't mind a little bit of that growth getting out of DC and coming to their own backyard. These two things go together, though, because if you actually did take one of those agencies and say, hey, you have to show up to work 5 days a week, and actually you have to go to Topeka, Kansas or Cincinnati, Ohio instead, you'd actually have a good number of the people quit anyway, which avoids the severance costs. So I kind of like that method, as you could kind of get 2 in 1 right there, is thinning it down and moving it out. But yeah, move the agencies out. You should fire about 75% of the federal employee headcount. If not, immediately on day one, you could ease into that pretty quickly. Agencies that are redundant can be reorganized that shouldn't exist. Department of Education is a good example. Shut it down, send the money back. Workforce training can move to the Department of Labor, and loan collections can move to Treasury. There's just a mass opportunity for a mega reorganization and thereby downsizing of this bureaucracy. And it's a one-way ratchet, because it's not like if another president comes back, they can write that back into existence by fiat. They'd actually have to go through Congress to do it. And so I think this is to call it once in a generation understates it. It might be closer to once in a century or once in a nation's lifetime opportunity to drastically reorganize and reshape and drive structural change in the federal government. And I'm pretty pumped up about that, actually.
Would you be involved in this effort?
I'd like to be. Yeah, absolutely. I've given it a lot of thought. It was the centerpiece of my presidential campaign. I spent a year and a half of my life. It was probably the most, I took a lot of positions on a lot of things, but this is probably the single most useful and certainly personally important to me part of the policy aspect of my campaign last year. And I have been involved, let's just say, in recent months.
All right. That's that. Yes, he will likely be involved. If you know the circles he's running in, he's definitely a part of it. I could see him and Elon coming together to actually operate this government agency and really start digging in from a business capitalistic minded person's perspective on what's going on in that bureaucracy. I could see them really tearing a hole into the status quo. So I really want you guys to understand it. And mind you, there's really nothing at this point that can stop this from going on. So I need you guys that work in government to pass this around and get a good understanding of this, that yeah, you might be a part of the cut. I don't feel bad about that. And I know that sounds weird, but you got to understand, from my perspective, I have been in the private sector for so long that I understand where the government sector gets its revenue. Okay. And I also understand the difference between working an hourly wage and making $90,000 to $120,000 a year, no matter how many hours you put in a week. Okay, you got to understand that there's a difference. If you make that type of money and you're self-made in the private sector, you know how many hours you're putting in to make that type of money. You have to be productive. In the government sector, it's all bureaucracy, in crowds, nepotism, and things that don't matter to get you to where you are. And that's not a good thing. That is not an equal playing ground. Nobody should have unequal opportunities, but equal outcomes is one of those oughts we talked about before. The government and bureaucracies create equal outcomes for those in the in crowd, and then also by product create absolute power dynamics like the FBI, like the EPA, like the SEC, like the FEC, like the FCC. All of these individual organizations should be looked at. I remember being in the military, and I mean, we'll order something for one of the Humvees or something that we needed for a product, and there was so many different vendors that we would use that for little things like an extra buttstock on an M16 would cost us $25,000. You know, I'm being hyperbolic, but the cost was absurd. But if you went to one of them, you went to a local mom and pop that, you know, and you're a civilian and you want to put a new buttstock on your AR-15, you might get a buttstock for $15. This is absurd. That needs to be looked at. I mean, I get it. There's people with that have interest on the other side of this thing that don't never want to see that thing end. This is also why I pointed out the World Economic Forum stuff that, on the last video, is because there's a lot of world moving going on around due to socialist natured individuals in bureaucracies. All right, so socialist minded, socialist natured people that install people in these bureaucratic positions benefit off of a lot of things like war, pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of money going around. There's another topic I need to bring up about Trump and global policy that just came to light. I don't know, this will be my next video in between my parts of capitalism. Do you guys remember throughout the campaign trail how many times Trump said, "Oh, before I'm even president, while I'm president-elect, this war stop. While I'm president-elect, this war stop." I don't know if you guys seen the news. I hate to segue. I got to show you guys proof. I can't just keep talking and not show you guys proof. Check this out. Hamas calls for end of war. All right, it's news outlets covering it all over. Let's go to this Newsweek, right? Can you guys see that? Hope you guys can. Hamas calls for immediate end to war after Trump wins election. He ain't even president yet. These guys have been talking tough for the last year and a half since they did this dumb shit. They've been refusing to get rid of their hostages. They refused peace talks. They wanted nothing to do with peace talks. Trump wins the election. Guess what? It seems that Trump wasn't speaking out his ass anyway, huh? But there's more to it that y'all are not seeing, what the mainstream media is not letting y'all see. They just paint Trump as this orange jackass that wants to take women's rights. It's just foolishness. Foolishness. There's a lot of things going on in the world. What President Putin say? Let's look that one up. Vladimir Putin wants peace. Symbols. Putin says Ukraine must remain neutral for there to be peace. Where is it at? That's June 14th, May 5th, May 25. Are they hiding that? I bet they are. Look at this. Putin praises Trump, says Russia is ready for dialogue. That's from Yahoo News. Let's find another article. Find another article. Zelensky spurs 2 days ago. Zelensky spurs Donald Trump's alleged peace plans. Everybody wants peace. What did Kamala say in her speech? Trump just wants to quit because he's a quitter? No, he wants people to stop dying. It's time for people to stop dying over dumb shit. Iraq wasn't enough for y'all. Afghanistan wasn't enough for y'all. Hell, that didn't start there. Desert Storm wasn't enough for y'all. Vietnam wasn't enough for y'all. Korean War wasn't enough for y'all. Hiroshima, Nagasaki wasn't enough for y'all. Do y'all not get it? It's bigger than abortion. It's about economics. It's about socialism, communism, Marxism. It's a battle that's bigger than y'all. These Marxists are using y'all. Anyway, let's get to the descriptions so I can break down some definitions. You know, this is still part one, so we taking a deep dive in, and just follow me. Just follow me. Socialism. Matter of fact, let's just go to the definitions first. Put it in the share. Okay, I need to stop and share this real quick. All right, socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, meaning the ultimate means, the ultimate outcome of producing something, distribution and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. All right. Similar policy or practice based on political and economic theory of socialism. All right. In Marxist theory, a transitional societal state between the overthrow of capitalism and the realization of communism. All right. So all of this socialism, Marxism, and communism all tied together. All right. So let's understand this first, get a foundation of that first before we actually go into depth. I already explained to you guys exactly like where I stand. That's what this whole video part one was about. Like my bias. I need you guys to understand where I'm coming from as a capitalist, to understand what I'm trying to inlay and explain about socialism, right? And why it's devastating, why it hurts us, why it doesn't work. Okay, socialism also is in essence, you know, something that goes hand in hand with democracies, because people are always going to vote in the easiest route for them to get ahead, even if they're not intentionally trying it. So over a long period of time, you get the Overton window shift that usually prescribes itself to a bigger group of people that lean more socialist. This is the reason why, if you look at most metropolitan areas where most people live on top of each other and the population density is very tight, you get more people that want to integrate their minds and their standards of how they move together. It just is what it is. And that's the reason why most of those areas are blue, Democrat, because Democrats usually cater to socialist ideas and perspectives. And it just so happens to be that way at all times. And they use that influence to run their cities down and prosper themselves. They suck the life out of the cities. They do it regularly. All right. The idea, it can seem very noble. We as a whole, we as a community need to share to each one's need. You know, it's very enlightening. It's a very good thing to. It's one of those oughts. What ought to be, it should be. But I guarantee you that the average person, if you're working for a company, say you're working, right, and you're being paid hourly, and this guy that works with you, you watch him all day, he's trying to find places to go to sleep, he's always complaining about the job, this and that. You get a promotion, but just because you get a promotion, he gets a promotion, man. His promotion is taken away from your promotion, right? So in essence, you could have a $2 raise, but because he needs to get a promotion too, they tell you that, yeah, we got to even it out. You're going to get $1 and he's going to get $1 on your hourly wage. You're going to feel some kind of way, like, hold up, why are we doing this? This guy, you might part way want to go ahead and snitch on this man, like drop it down. Like, hold up, man, if you don't watch them cameras, that dude behind on the stairway sleeping every day. How the hell I'm gonna get less because he's doing something? Luckily, we don't operate that way, right? But think about if you did. Think about that. And then on top of that, say if you make $100, every $100 you make, you got to give $60 to the government. They tax you 60% because that's the standard rate of most of them socialist countries. Think about that. 60% of your dollars, you taking $60 to the government every time you make 100. Why? Because they have to feed themselves and they have to keep getting bigger and they have to keep making more rules and regulations, and therefore they need more people to enforce them. They just keep growing and growing and growing. That's what socialist countries do. You know, a good example of, you know, what socialism can produce good would be the literacy rate in Venezuela. They increased the literacy rate in Venezuela a multitude of times, but all of their other socialist policies crashed the economy to the point where between 2005 to 2016, they went from being, in 2005, the fourth richest nation in the world due to their oil reserves, to 2016 being one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere. And their citizens was lining up for rice, and they didn't have zoo animals anymore because they ate them. Socialist policies in this way every time throughout history if you dive deep enough into it and start really seeing the truth. Let's talk about the definition of capitalism. Capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Like I told you before, I got out of prison homeless. I didn't have anything. And within 10 years, I now have a paid off home because I cut the bullshit and I got busy. I got to work. And I strive to own things and privatize my life. Therefore, I can add assets to my future generations, pass on things that, you know, my kids can actually prosper from. And it's not just all financial, it's mental too, right? All of that is private equity. You got intellectual property, you got hard assets, you got investments, everything. But all of it is translated into what you did with your time. How did you spend your time so you can make money? People think about spending money all the time, but they don't think about how they're spending their time. That's you have to really dig into that to understand that. All right, so this was part one. I'm going to dig into it some more over the next coming weeks. I got some things to talk about on multiple levels. I don't like my videos lasting this long because I don't want to bore people. So we're going to get to part two coming here shortly. Stay tuned. Remember, like this, share this, subscribe to this, like this, smash that like button like you've been here before. If you appreciate the information, please speak up. If there's anything you guys want to ask me, anything you want to tell me, anything you want to share with me, look in the description below. My email will be there. And yeah, man, all of you guys have a great Sunday.